The New Journeys expansion pack was originally released in February 2022. It is a weird bundle that includes 3 reskins of existing motive power we already had, intended for the 3 core routes in the TSW2 package. Personally, I've never liked the concept of rehashing and reselling existing motive power, though clearly Dovetail likes it, as they've made 2 more Loco add-on bundles after the release of Train Sim World 3, despite all the criticism against the idea. Originally, these 3 reskins were sold as a complete bundle that cost $17.59 in New Zealand's currency. DTG took a long time to port them over to TSW3, but when they finally did, they decided to make them available separately for $5.19 each. That way, you don't have to buy the entire pack just to get the one thing you actually want, and I bought this pack before TSW3 was even a thing. What we got with the New Journeys pack was the Deutsche Bahn BR423 with S-Bahn Koln branding for Schnellfahrstrecke Koln, as well as the EMD SD40 in CSX Grey Ghost livery for Sanderpatch grade, and the London Underground 1972 stock in its original condition for the Bakerloo line. In my opinion, not that it really matters, the only part of this pack that's any good is the German side. Although we already had the BR423 with the München to Augsburg route, we also got an overhauled timetable for Koln to Aachen. The route still doesn't feel as busy as Nachwirke Dresden, or even Bremen to Oldenburg for that matter, but it does have a good timetable for the S-Bahn Koln S19 service, which you can only drive between Koln Hauptbahnhof and Düren. There's also the S12 service that only goes as far as Horem. And as I often find myself saying, I apologise for when I get the pronunciations of these German names wrong. Quite bizarrely, there's also an empty stock move that will start at Düren and go over to Aachen late in the evening, returning to Koln in passenger service the next morning. Any other time of the day, the S-Bahn trains will terminate at Düren. Also, in before someone else makes the hungry like the wolf by Düren joke. I found that the BR423's physics are largely unchanged from the S-Bahn München variant, and the interior's not really much different either. I always found with the München variant that the brakes were a little too sluggish, which is something you don't want when trying to run a high-density commuter service with several stations that are very close together. That's now 4 spots I've seen on this route where the overhead wires are missing. If you're the kind of person that thinks it's funny to watch me lose my cool over this sort of thing, I don't take kindly to your mockery. And I'm not going to rant about the wires this time because it's not good to get as angry as I did on a frequent basis, especially over something this trivial. Looking at some of the reviews on Steam, I found out that this is apparently the wrong variant of the BR423 for S-Bahn Koln services. I saw that the München variant has what appears to be a refurbished interior, but I don't know enough about the BR423 to verify if this in-game Koln variant is accurate or not. Even if it's not the right variant, it's still the right type of train for this service. There's nothing too special about the British side of this pack. All you get is a different livery for the London Underground 1972 tube stock, depicting the class in its original unpainted aluminium with red doors guise from when it first entered service. You also get at least 3 additional scenarios, and the train, or rather the reskin, layers into timetable mode, allowing you to choose from either the original or refurbished variants of the 72 stock. For some reason, DTG didn't bother backdating the interior to its original condition, but there is a texture patch available on the TrainSim community website that fixes the issue. In its default state, the reskin feels very lazily made. I reckon it would have been a better idea to add new motive power to this route, in the form of the 1959 tube stock, rather than just giving us a payware reskin. Although the 59s were mainly used on the Northern line, there is photographic evidence on Flickr to prove that they also ran on the Bakerloo line in the 1980s. And speaking of the time period, this unrefurbished 72 stock doesn't fit too well on this route that's clearly set in the 21st century. Although of course I'm not expecting Dovetail to backdate this route to the 1980s condition. That would be a bit too much to ask. By far the worst, or most comically pathetic, part of this pack is the EMD SD40 in CSX Grey Ghost colours. I think this is one of the laziest things I've ever seen from Dovetail, as they just took the Clinchfield SD40 and repainted it in a CSX livery without even changing the number font, let alone the number range. Talk about a lack of respect for the source material. For context, the Clinchfield Railroad had 25 EMD SD40s on their roster, and by the way, these are not the same as the later SD40-2. These things were built from 1966 to 1971, and were originally numbered from 3000 to 3024, although 3005 was wrecked in a derailment in 1974 and didn't last long enough to join CSX. The remaining 24 were renumbered from 8335 to 8358. And if I can find out all that information in less than 15 minutes, why was it too much to ask for Dovetail to at least get this reskin right first time? Keep in mind that you have to pay real money to get this thing. As if the inaccuracies weren't bad enough, the reskin doesn't really add anything new to the sandpatch grade route. All it does is provide a few extra scenarios and layer into timetable mode, so you can choose from either this or the other CSX locomotives that Dovetail have made. Namely the EMD SD40-2 and GP38-2, as well as the General Electric C40-8W and AC4400CW. Aside from the pathetic horn sound Dovetail used across all four locomotives, they are decent enough, and much better than the rubbish SD40 reskin. The other problem with this thing is that the Grey Ghost livery is out of date for the time period that SPG is set in. As far as I know, this livery dates back to the early 1980s when CSX was just starting up. And it certainly doesn't look right amongst all the locomotives wearing the YN2 and YN3B liveries. In a similar situation to the 1972 stock, there is a mod patch on the TS community website that replaces the default livery on the SD40 with something that looks much, much better. I'll leave links to both the 72 and SD40 mods in the description. I think that the only part of the New Journeys expansion pack that's worth getting for yourself is the S-Bahn Koln BR423. There seems to be a weird double standard with this pack, in that Koln to Aachen gets a whole new timetable, while the Bakerloo line and Sandpatch grade only gets one livery and a few scenarios each. Fortunately, DTG have since added a new and much more realistic timetable for the London Underground route, and at least the individual parts of this pack are now pretty cheap. I'd say the BR423 and improved Koln to Aachen timetable are enough to justify the $5 price tag. Increased service variation is something I always appreciate, as long as the motive power is operating in realistic environments.